I'm just going to give it 1 or 2 more minutes. I keep on admitting people, so just want to give everyone a chance to join. All right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome VetPartners members, and thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited from the Technology and Innovation SIG to present today about multi-party data exchange. And we have two individuals here that are experts in this area. So hopefully we have lots of questions. They're going to be talking to you a little bit about their companies, and then obviously have time for questions as well. First, I'd like to introduce our two presenters. So first, Martin Trapp-Werner. He is the VP and General Manager of Data and Platform Technologies at VetSource, founder of Vet Success. So many of you knew when he first started that company. And he's based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So we were just discussing earlier how he has yet to make his way down across the border. So we're looking forward to hopefully seeing him in person soon. He's had a successful career working in and with small businesses. And he was even just talking about how he has spent so much time thinking and talking about vet data and what it means and what it can do for our profession. I'd also like to introduce Taylor Kavanaugh. He is the CEO and founder of PetDesk, based out of San Diego, California. Prior to starting that company, he had a technical career and helped in the semiconductor application, as well as working in sales before he came over to the bright side and work now with pet care providers and pet parents. So glad to have Taylor over here in the animal health industry. I'm going to go ahead and let Taylor start. So Taylor, if you have your presentation and want to open that up and share, I'll make sure that we can all view it.
Oh, I thought we were just gonna, I thought we were gonna skip presentations, right?
Yep, we were. Thank you for reminding me. So excellent.
No
so we're just going to go ahead and get started then. So Taylor, if you don't mind sharing with us a little bit about your company. So tell us about PetDesk and specifically what your product is. And then just on a daily basis, what is kind of the overview of the parties? So who's involved with data exchange for your product on a daily basis?
Yeah. So morning everyone. Great to be here. Happy to be talking about this topic. I will say Martin is the expert. I cannot claim expert status. So Martin will go second and bring the real expert opinion. We just work in a lot of data, but I definitely can't claim the expert level that Martin has. So PetDesk, we are a patient engagement platform. So we, you know, in the earlier days, it was called client communications, sending email reminders, text messages, postcards, all of that kind of stuff. You know, I think what a lot of us are doing now has turned more into patient engagement, workflow management. So we have a free app for the pet parents. They can engage in their pet's health there. They can connect with their providers. It's more back and forth type of communication. And then, of course, if you're working in patient engagement, you're working with clients and the front desk staff. Most of the work of the front desk staff, of the practice manager, and even the vets and the vet nurses deal with those clients. And so you invariably get into workflow management type of solutions. So just to give you an idea, you know, we send all of the reminders, we have the app, but we also do websites, online reputation management. We have a loyalty program. We put the online pharmacies like VetSource into the app. We have an insurance buying guide. We put care credit financing into the app. So a lot of different stakeholders. It would probably take the rest of the meeting for me to explain all of the different ways that we're exchanging data and all the different stakeholders involved. But to give you an idea of the major ones, we directly integrate with practice management systems. We also work with the data extraction tools like Covetrus Connect. To then pull data out of the practice management systems and into our system. We have these partners that we may or may not share data with, these industry partners like insurance, financing, online pharmacy, et cetera. And then, of course, we have the pet parents and their data, and they may create new data in the app that then gets mixed with the data that we're pulling from the PIMS. And so I think that gives you a good overview of our sort of data layout.
Thanks, Taylor. So I'm going to change over to Martin. So Martin, if you can answer tell us a little bit more about your company and the products, and same question, where is the data? Who do you, for your primary product, and who else do you exchange data with?
Yeah, thank you. So VetSource, traditionally known for its home delivery, is in the middle of a transformation, with the acquisition of Vet Success and their ownership interests in VetPet and a number of other initiatives that are on the go. We're extremely focused on workflow. It's funny that Taylor mentioned the workflow management. I mean, that is sort of the new focus, is how can we as technology companies enable practices with better workflow. And so VetSource is bringing together its traditional home delivery business, data and analytics, patient engagement, and a number of other elements that we're working on as well, which we'll have some announcements in the next sort of 3 to 6 months, I would think, to really round out that technology offering. And data flows through the entire enterprise. And I think Taylor did a really nice job of talking about direct integration with the PIMS. Yes, absolutely. Some PIMS where you don't have direct integration, you need to work with an extraction partner, of which data extraction has become fairly highly commoditized. Certainly Covetrus Connect and DataPoint are among the bigger of the two players, but there are others that do data extraction work as well. And then so you have to get the data from the practices. That's challenge number one. Then you use it internally. Taylor rightly, I think, identifies that creates some resultant data. It's what we call the data that comes out of the work that we're doing. And then data can be shared always in a de-identified and aggregate way with industry partners and other interested parties, sometimes for profit, right? So sometimes we sell that data as market insights, and other times we put that data out into the universe. As an example, I would point to the industry tracker that Vet Success currently posts with AVMA and updates on a weekly basis. So that's, I think, the flow of data.
So we had 2 more things. I'm going to go back to Taylor and kind of open up the, kind of discussion about the data. So one of the questions really goes into, how do you determine whose data belongs to who? And then kind of along the same lines, what about that new data and who has the rights and ownership to that? So if you want to talk kind of about that.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear Martin's response to this, because I think I think we're going to see
Yeah,
a
sorry.
big shift here in the industry, and we're all going to need to kind of figure out how it happens, because you know I've been thinking for a while that there's really only one answer to this. Every single time you ask the question of who owns the data, it's the pet parent. And as long as pets remain property, if pets gain personhood or something like that, then they'll own the data eventually. But I don't think that's coming anytime soon. And so the way that we think about it and try to prepare for the future is the exact same way is that the consumer owns their own data, right? Whether it's human health or whatever it may be. The same is here. It's the consumer, it's the pet parent that owns that data, and then everybody else in the chain is leasing it from that pet parent. And there's a value exchange, right? You're saying, hey, pet parent, you're gonna allow me to use this data, and I'm gonna give you some value for it, right? I'm gonna remind you to come back to the practice, or I'm gonna show you quotes for insurance, or I'm gonna help you take better care of your pet, or whatever it may be. But I feel like we should all be thinking that we're just leasing this data. So even if they create new data and it's in our app, and we're gleaning insights from that and everything, we can use those insights, but all of that core data is theirs. And we, in California, we have CCPA, and so we've had to start preparing for that and figuring out how, if a consumer says, okay, delete all of my data, then we have to go in and we have to delete all of that data that we have, right? And I think we're going to see that roll out across the US at some point. I mean, it's definitely already in Europe with GDPR. That's a very simple answer, but when we actually get into the details and into like specific use cases, and I think this Martin can probably speak to this, it starts to get a little bit more complicated and nuanced to talk about. So, but I'll leave it there first.
Martin,
Yeah,
do you want to add some thoughts?
I mean, no, I want to run for the hills, honestly. I mean, it's a very it's a really hairy topic. I think Taylor's touched on it, appropriately. The CCPA, I think, is the tip of the spear in terms of data privacy and protection of what we'll see in the US. It looks and feels very much like GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, I think, in Europe. And fundamentally, yes, pet parents will have the right to opt out. There is the concept of being a data processor, which is sort of enshrined in those pieces of legislation. And it's easy to get caught up in a conversation about sort of who owns the data, and people being able to opt out of the data and all that, you can burn a lot of calories on that topic, and it's worthwhile and important. But underlying it fundamentally, I think there's sort of an important consideration about just being good stewards of data. Like, why do those protections exist? Those protections, they don't exist because they're not looking to protect pet. This is the world according to Martin. I appreciate I'm being recorded, but this is not a legal opinion or anything like that. It's like those in my mind, we're not looking to protect pet parents from being wildly spammed by their veterinary practices. There are some really bad actors who did some really irritating behaviors and sold data and were not good stewards of data. And so we had to put in, I mean, what is CCPA? The California Consumer Protection Act. It's to protect the consumers. And I think if we take the position of we will always be good stewards, yes, we will always abide by the law. If somebody wants to opt out of communications or wants us to delete their data, we should absolutely do that. But, you know, the fundamental principle always has to be just be a good steward of the data. Don't sell it. It's not, don't sell it. Don't send anything to anybody who hasn't asked to be sent something. Never use the data without telling people what you're using it for. Be transparent about your terms of use. Like, there's just these sort of basic decency principles that I think sort of have to undergird all of our work with data in the industry. And if we do those things, yes, we are going to get CCPA complaints. Somebody's going to get a CCPA complaint or a GDPR complaint. But honestly, with those basic principles, I think that for me, that always has given us personally a sense of comfort that, you know, I'm going to stand on the side of, hey, we're not doing anything untoward, right? Always abide by the law, don't do anything untoward. And so, yep, the data is, whether there's some data that's owned by the pet parent, there's some data that's owned by the vet practice. We build resultant data, we own some of that data. But if we follow these principles, the data ownership, the whole conversation about data ownership shifts to, what are you using the data for, and are you being a good steward of the data?
Yeah, Martin, I think that's a great point. So I was thinking about some examples in getting ready for today, and one of the examples was us sending health service reminders, the most basic client communications, right? It's been going on for a long time. It was postcards, and now it's email and text and push notifications and all of this other stuff. And as I was thinking it through, and we take the same approach, like, let's never, we don't share data. We don't use it for any other purpose than what we've told the hospital that we're going to use it for. And I kind of came up with this idea of this data supply chain integrity. So if you think about, you've got the pet parent, right? And we go back to, okay, the pet parent owns the pet and they own their data. When they go to the veterinary hospital, that hospital, usually on a piece of paper, gets permission from the pet parent to share their contact information, to share the pet health records, and for various reasons, right? But one of those reasons is to then to send health service reminders. And so you've got permission from the pet parent to send these health service reminders, and to share that data with a third party to do that thing. Then, okay, so let's say Pet Desk, we are that third party, right? So we now get permission from the veterinary hospital to extract that data and then to send that data through different channels. And in both of those cases, there's a third party, right? There's a third party extraction service that we're using to extract the data, that data processor type of concept, and then a third party to send the emails or send the text messages, like a Twilio or one of these larger software companies. And this is how software is built now, right? There's tons of software companies, and you're passing around. And again, those are sort of data processors as well. And then those third parties are getting permission from Pet Desk to extract that data, but again, specifically just for this purpose, and then to send to all the contacts that we want to send to, but again, specifically just for this service, for this purpose. And so, to Martin's point, we need to make sure that we're not doing anything that we haven't gotten permission from in the chain, right? But we also need to verify that everybody in our data supply chain is also only doing what they should be doing with that data. And I think as the future rolls on, that's, the commoditization of data extraction is a great point. I think, I'm guessing that there's going to be a differentiation on how that data extraction data is used, that resultant data that comes through the processing, and there's going to be more of a focus on the integrity of all of this. To Martin's point, that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, a lot of this data was just free flowing and being sold all over the place, and that certainly can't happen anymore. That makes for a really, really good clickbait article that can get a lot of people in trouble very quickly, right?
Yeah, you can do it once, but only once.
Yeah, exactly. So I wholeheartedly agree with us all needing to do what's right. But I'm curious to see when we're actually going to get, at some of the larger companies, somebody who's in supply chain management and is just focused on data and starting to think about those things. And I don't know, Martin, maybe you all are already starting to think about those things.
I mean, I think we're largely there in in the industry at large. You think about the leadership that deals with Data Point, Covetrus Connect, some of the other parties that both use data for their own services and have some extraction services, animal care technologies, even some of the others. We spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about data, custody of the data, contractual obligations around the data, termination rights, reps and warranties, and all of this stuff is enshrined in many pages of small legal print. And by and large, our industry, I think, we have all been pretty good stewards of data. I know somebody wants to bring up, or at least is thinking about, there have been historical lapses, or there have been rumors of historical lapse, with accusations and people believing that data was used in an untoward way. I have no evidence that it was. Other people say that it was. It's like one or two stories, and then it kind of died down. Like everybody at this point, I think, in my estimation, knowing most of the players in the data space, in my estimation, we've kind of level set on, okay, nobody be a punk. Let's just be like upstanding, good stewards of data. It'd be interesting to see it even more formalized, Taylor. I don't know that how much more value that brings. Certainly, if somebody were to step out of line in terms of the good stewardship, I think that this stuff sort of travels in cycles. There'd be much more noise about my data, my use of my data, all of that stuff. The one other point that I wanted to raise is we also need to talk about what kind of data we're talking about, because pet's name, like, I remember having these early conversations early in my career around data. DVM would say to me, my data has a ton of value to you. And I'm like, in aggregate, data has value, but like nobody's really interested when Fluffy's cruciate surgery was, right? So, and if people really wanted to know who your clients were, I'm not going to sell them that data anyway. They're not going to find that data from us. They can find that data on the deep dark web, right? So like data flows all over the place. And the protected data we're talking about is personally identifiable data, specifically client names and addresses really is what's sitting in the PIMS that is personally identifiable. Everything else is not personally identifiable data. Clint?
Yeah, I just have a point on that. Mostly specifically because the amount of just cyber incidences that we've been a part of trying to help practices recover in, and work with a number of law firms across the country that specialize in data. I think it is a little bit dangerous to think of data as only being specifically the name and the address. When you look at CCPA, which appears to be the standard across what most courts are looking to, especially since we've had 8 other states adopt the legislation and we're only seeing it grow in significance. CCPA itself has over, I think, 19 points in which it considers an identifier. And so if I can get any one of those 19 pieces, and then we can kind of triangulate it, and even to say triangulation is a little bit bad because CCPA gets a little bit complicated in how you would then be liable. But if I have enough data to single out somebody, so I could have their dog's name, their name, and a phone number, that's 3 specific pieces of information that separate John, John who lives in Toronto from John who lives in Denver, right? Because of the differences there. And so I think we have to be careful not to think of just, because we hear a lot of vets in the space. I also say, well, to your point, like, who cares if Fluffy had if their vaccination records were compromised? Well, I can give a specific use case that we were working on in a forensic analysis. There was a disclosure notification that had to go out from this specific hospital that based on their data being exfiltrated and compromised. And so, yes, while maybe most people don't care, once I have those 3 pieces of data, there's a lot more responsibility on the business. So I think I agree with your point, but I think we have to be a little bit more encompassing about what data we talk about that is protected.
Yeah, I want to be really clear though, and it's been a while. I agree that there are, if you say it's 19, it's 19. There is a long laundry list of what personal identifiable data is defined as, both GDPR and CCPA, which I think will be the standard, the gold standards. My point is that just in veterinary practice, we don't really keep that. We don't have, social security numbers. I really hope, mercifully, we don't have, health status. We don't have, many of those 19 don't exist. So it's not to say that,
yeah, but
not to say there's a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy, like one is just as valuable as another. It's just that pet name is not protected data, right? If somebody were to lift nothing but a list of pet names from a practice, there would be no breach, no standard under the law. Now, I want to be clear. Again, there's what's the standard under the law versus what is it to be a good steward of data and, manage data securely and appropriately and respectfully. Just because it's not protected doesn't mean we shouldn't be protecting it.
Yeah, correct. But I think that from the health standpoint, there aren't a lot of health indicators because those are already covered under the Privacy Act and HIPAA. Right, so we already have federal legislation that covers those health indicators. So I think CCPA takes a little bit further as to what it identifies. So like, if I get email, you're right. Like I could also just exfiltrate a list of email addresses from a practice, and at that point there probably wouldn't be a notification requirement. And I agree, the same thing with like a pet name. But if I combine like email address, a pet name, and a full name, that then can kind of triangulate this individual person, and then we're dealing with protected information.
Yeah, I'm curious. I think we're kind of, we're going down this the data privacy and protection side of things. I'm curious, since
get us out of there, Taylor.
Yeah, well, yeah, since the webinar was kind of sparked from a discussion that you all were having, a VetPartners discussion. I'm wondering what was what came up that was the concern that you wanted to talk through with data ownership? Is it the concern of who owns the data and protects it in terms of what we're talking about right now, or is it the concern of, hey, are we stripping value out of the practice and away from veterinarians and using it, for our own good, and they're missing out? I'm just curious, Christine, if you have thoughts there, if anybody here, what kind of sparked this interest?
It had started with the AVM. We were
Stacey.
talking about the AVMA's like good stewardship of data, their data principles is what had come about. And so we were kind of interested in, how is it that like 2 big players like you guys yourselves that are using a lot of data, what are your thoughts around this? Do you think it goes far enough? How are you managing it? I mean, maybe back to Martin's point where he's like, hey, we do have this obligation to be good stewards and shepherds of that data. How do we even start to have that kind of conversation?
Yeah.
And I see Stacey, you go ahead, Stacey.
So for my career as a DVM, I've been trained that I own the data. I've been trained that the x-rays for the big piece are mine. And I do not have to deliver the x-rays to the client ever if I don't want to, because I took them and they're mine. I've also been trained that the patient record is the same way. It's mine. It's not theirs. They're my notes, my records, my information. So when we talk about, and Diane, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how, as a DVM, I view data. It's mine at my business. So when it's really at turning the tables to say, to me as a vet, that it's the pet owner's data. Like that's a new way of thinking for sure in my brain. I just from my legacy of old school knowledge.
Do we have any attorneys on the call? Because I actually don't recall where we landed on. Like, I think your notes are yours actually, but I don't know if you have to give them up if requested.
Yeah.
I don't
So
know.
Only by
I
a
do know,
state board. If
Yeah.
the state board requires it, I mean, I'm just putting on my CVMA president hat right now, but if a state board requires me to deliver those things, I deliver them to the state board. I don't have to give them to the vet, to the pet owner. Diane?
Well, I thought it was more the information, like the hard copy of the record is ours because it's our legal defense. And so like, when you think about the x-rays, I would never release my x-rays, but the owner could pay me to have them copied and they could then get a copy of the x-ray. So I thought that I had to release the information and I could never withhold the information just because they owed me money, because I remember those conversations happen. So I believe they were entitled to the information. It's just that the actual record would never leave my possession.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's what you're thinking, Stacy, but I don't think I was allowed to withhold information that might contribute to the pet getting care in another facility. Especially like I was not allowed to hold it hostage just because the bill wasn't paid.
Maybe I just held it hostage because the bill was
Well, I think this is the really interesting turning point that we're going to see. I think to Martin's point earlier about being good stewards, and there not necessarily being laws that are driving some of this, right? We're seeing the consumer, just and society as a whole, basically saying the consumer owns all of their data, right? We have HIPAA and the consumer owns all of that. You still do have to figure out how does the doctor, though, in all of this, also still have their data and be able to keep their records and do all of that. I certainly don't hope that HIPAA comes to the pet space. I don't think that that would be an overall great thing for any of us involved if it gets as restrictive and expensive. I don't think we can afford it as an industry, actually. If you just look at, I mean, most of us tech companies just wouldn't even be able to pay the bills if we had to do everything that you have to do for HIPAA. But I do think that there's the law, and then there's like what is the customer going to expect? And I think more and more the customer is going to expect, I own all of this data. Now, I think it's you bring up a great point, Diane, of they think that they own the information, not necessarily the actual pet record, right? I think that's a good distinction, but they certainly feel like, hey, I should have access to all my data. I should be able to see all of it. I would not be surprised if most pet parents these days would be like, no, I want to see the x-rays. Like and request it, and they'll probably be willing to pay for it. I think they're what we're seeing is they're much more engaged in data in all types, all aspects of their life, right? And this, I think, is something critical for us as an industry to think through. For us, we have so our sort of vision for the future, we call the 3 laws of Pet Desk, and we're going to extend and improve the lives of pets. We're going to extend and improve the lives of pet care providers, as long as it doesn't conflict with that first law. And then we're going to extend and improve the lives of our people, our employees, as long as it doesn't conflict with those first 2. And we're all in this for the care of pets, right? And we're focused on pet parents and helping them get their pets the best care. But we also need to remember, as I mean, most of us in here do, that the pet care providers are also a big part of that, and we have to figure out how they play in this in this whole equation. And I think right now with some of the disintermediation of veterinarians in the space, going through the pandemic and services that are going direct to the pet parent and cutting the veterinarian out, we're going to see them take this much more pet parent focused, hey, you have access to all the data, you completely own your pet's care and all of that. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next, I think, 2, 3, 4 years as we all sort of stake our claims to who we're serving and who's around the data circle, let's say.
So I'm kind of with you, Stacy. That is a major shift from the veterinarians to start thinking about pet owners kind of, and, kind of being the center of the data and having that. And I think, Taylor, it goes to what you just said, is that, that access, what does that allow them to better maintain the pet health, where they go for providers, and really what that starts bringing in is more third parties. Maybe I'm taking the data from here and bringing it over there, and how is it utilized and shared, and those types of things. But want to open it up in case anybody else had any questions. I want to be conscious of everyone's time too. If somebody has a question, you can unmute or type it in the chat, or any other thoughts or comments from anyone.
So you guys did touch a little bit on what my canned question was going to be, is like, how has CCPA affected you guys, especially with the rollout? I guess when and Taylor, you touched on this a little bit with this idea of the individual pet parent owning the data and kind of taking this sort of necessary piece. And then Martin, you touched on the idea of like, creating this transparency and allowing people to understand. I think when we look at GDPR versus CCPA, we have GDPR, which makes you have to opt in, like I have to opt in, where CCPA just gives me the right to opt out. Like those are the two biggest differences. So I feel like GDPR forces a little bit more transparency. So I think what I'd be curious is how do we, for example, I guess to give a use case where I'm going with this question, like if we look at just last year at the pandemic, Martin, the work you guys did to help us understand where the industry was as a whole was very valuable, right? But how do we draw the line, or how do we create transparency in the industry so that the hospital knows that they're participating in this, because if you ask them, would they really know? And how do we get to a point where, what is a valuable use of collecting somebody's data, aggregating it, and then using it for some other purpose, versus how do we start to define and draw the lines where things might get a little bit fishy?
Like what gets fishy?
Well, I mean, I guess an example is I had a conversation with an organization that works with a few thousand practices across the country, and they're looking at setting kind of some similar standards in place as to, if you're going to be a vendor with access to our hospitals, you have to meet certain standards. One vendor said no, because we like to sell the data to corporate groups that are looking to acquire practices, so they know which practices to target. For this organization, they weren't okay with that, right? So it's interesting, how do we define, and for some people that may be okay, and for some may not be. So I guess it just, I think another use case would be is like with Spotify as a free service. And so now you start to see them saying, hey, there's an exchange here. If you're going to give me some personal information about what ad is interesting to you, and if you'll watch this ad for 30 minutes, I'll give you 30 minutes of free listening, right? So we're seeing kind of this more, how do we be more transparent in it and being clear about what we're doing, especially under the guidance of CCPA. I can request to say, hey, what are you doing with my data? Who are you selling it to? And then if I don't like it, I opt out. But back to the point of like kind of maybe going above and beyond and being good shepherds of the data, how do we be more transparent in that conversation?
Taylor?
You want me to take this? Yeah, I do have some ideas on this. So, so one, I think if we do not want to go to an opt-in type of situation. If we end up in an opt-in type of situation, it's nearly impossible to then get every vet practice and every customer that comes into the vet practice to opt in to all the different types of communications and things that we want to do to help them with pet health, right? And so I think that it becomes too restrictive, and as Martin put it, if we're all focused on just getting better care for the pets, right? If we're doing what's right, then we shouldn't need a full opt-in super restrictive policy, right? And so we can still do this opt-out policy. And then, you know, in terms of transparency, I think the way that we think about it is we make sure that it's very easy to opt out. So for our insurance buying guide that we have, any practice can opt out of it, right? They can say, nope, we don't want insurance in the app in front of our customers, and we set it up from the beginning to do that. Or they can say, we don't want this insurance provider, or we don't want that one, right? We give them the choice, and then I think we just be very transparent as we go, and it has to be a working relationship. If you try to build, you know, if we try to tell the vet practice to put on that sheet, that new client form, all of the things that their data might actually be used for, right? And then do that with the vet hospital. I mean, nobody reads terms and conditions anyway. I think it just needs to be a open conversation, and every time we're doing something new, we move into a new area, we tell them about it, and we say, this is what's going to happen. Hey, let's talk about it. Okay, you don't want to do this? Well, we already built in that you can just opt out of it. And then if you do find somebody who doesn't want data sold to a buying group, or, you know, whatever this other one was, they just say, nope, I don't want to do that. And there you go. Right. That's the best answer I can come up with at this point, at least. Martin, I don't know your thoughts there.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to add, and I have no idea how long we're here for. I can talk about this all day. That's all I do. I talk about this all day. So whether it's here with you, or when I go back to the office or the virtual offices, I'm going to talk about this anyway. So are we good on time still? Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
The only thing I was going to add is, and this group has heard me talk about this before, is one of the favorite documents that we ever produced was our terms of service in plain English. And the lawyers hate this document, right? But I think it's really important that every organization have a terms of use in plain English, because this is like no word of a lie. I really believe almost every single time that any practice has come to me personally, in my experience, with a concern about how we use our data, what I say to them is, I'm absolutely happy to have a conversation with you about exactly how we use it, exactly your concerns. I'll address anything. I'll address anything that, you know, is in our actual legal terms of use with you. But have you read our terms of use in plain English? Because the terms of use in plain English mirror the legal terms, and there should be no surprise. You shouldn't read anything in the legal terms that aren't, you know, referenced any major items. I mean, we don't reference the amount of insurance we carry in the terms in plain English. But, you know, if everybody had terms in plain English, it just melts away and solves, because I think people like create sort of stories about what's happening with their data, right? And it's easy for these things to get misconstrued. And I think, you know, if you lay it out in plain English and you're true to the plain English, you're in reasonably good shape.
Martin, I'd love for you to share, if you have a chance, that terms in plain English, because I think it goes to a little bit what Taylor said, is it's that open conversation as things change and develop, and especially with technology, when you have new offerings, And I think when you do read some terms of service, it is so, while trying to be transparent, it's so broad that it basically is meaningless, because it says anything that we can use to make our business better or help improvements or do this. It really doesn't say anything. And so I think that kind of plain English and being open and saying, hey, when new products come out, when new uses come out, when we try something new, you'll have the ability to opt out when it makes sense, but not be very plain spoken, because I do feel a lot of the data and where people's confusion comes from is truly around just not knowing. I didn't know you were doing that, or I wasn't sure of what that actually meant.
Yeah, I would love for you guys to also elaborate, because Martin, I think you bring up an interesting dichotomy that is in the vet space. On one hand, we have veterinary, it seems a lot of practice owners have this idea of, well, back to your original point, well, who wants Fluffy's medical record, or who wants to know when Fluffy had their dental? But yet the moment you think about introducing something that's going to pull data from their practice management system, it's all, you get to this situation where it's like all the guards are up. So we have like there seems to be this interesting dichotomy, and I'm not sure if either of you have come across this, where on one hand, they don't seem to care, but then on the other hand, they really do care. Yeah,
it's funny because I was just going to tell the story. The number of times I've been sort of like, then where people have put up those walls and been like, okay, I want to work with you. I want you to talk to me about my data, but you can't use it to aggregate it and share it with other people in a de-identified and aggregate way. And to which I say, like, it's funny because like just recently, right? It's funny because you just thanked me and complimented me on the work that our team did to provide visibility into the industry during COVID. And like, if everybody took your position, there would be no way for us to track and see what was happening in the industry. And that melts it away almost every time at every size organization, from the single doctor independent practice to the some of the biggest, baddest corporates there are. Biggest, by baddest, I mean like biggest, like really badass driven corporate, not like bad. Corporates are not bad. I'm going to stop talking now.
Yeah, no, but Martin, I think like that's, when I was saying earlier that value exchange, right? I think that there is a value to your data, right? And consumers more and more are going to understand, and businesses are more and more going to understand that like there's monetary value to me having this data. And so, but as long as we're going and saying we're giving you this value back, or maybe it's not even you directly, but we're giving the industry this value back, or we're giving, for us, as we think through, we had this goal of by 2050 to have generated 10 million years of additional pet life, right? And somehow have used all of this data that we have so that your dog lived an extra year or an extra 2 years. So your cat lived an extra 3 years. And I think if you're giving that value back, then people start to think much more like, oh, okay, well, that I can get behind, right? I think what people are worried about is you're going to take, and we got this when we rolled out the insurance buying guide, right? We got vets called us and we're like, well, we know you're making money off of this insurance and you're just selling the data to everyone and trying to get as many people on insurance. And we said, no, that's not what we're doing. We're just putting flyers out in the front desk. We're just doing that in an app instead of you putting it on your front desk. But I think there is this, they see us getting value and them not getting value. And so now they've given away something, right? And we just need to be clear that like, no. This is value for all of us. And when Clint, you asked earlier, like, where's that line? And for us, that's why we have the 3 laws of Pet Desk. Because if something is just going to serve Pet Desk and make us more profitable or better or whatever, but it isn't going to serve the pet care providers, or it isn't going to serve the pets, then we're not going to do it. But if we can hit all of them, then, and insurance buying guiding, and sorry, I keep bringing it up, but it's like our new thing, so it's top of mind. and we really talked about this a lot, like how do we do this correctly? And we talked with a ton of vets to make sure, like, do you believe in insurance? Do you think it's going to be better for your practice, right? And the vast majority of them said, yes, we do think it's going to be better for our practice. And we said, okay, great. This is one that then now there's value exchange for everything. And so then when we have that data conversation, it's going to be an easier conversation. I think the other side of it is you'll never get over yeah, but if I hook up with you, then, back in the day, Henry Schein told me that hackers are going to come in and take all your data. Like, that's a separate one that you just gotta kind of work through and say, like, hey, that's not really exactly how hackers work. Just please don't click on emails that come from random people that you don't know, type of thing. But anyway.
Yeah. Go ahead, Christy. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I know we didn't have a set time, but I wanted to be conscious of everyone's time. So I'm just going to let, well, Clint, any last thoughts on your side from the tech SIG as well?
No, yeah, it's great. Thank you guys for being here and sharing time. And yeah, I could talk to both of you for hours, but I know we don't have that much time. So I greatly appreciate you guys taking time out of your day, and everybody else who joined. And yeah, I as well love this conversation. And to Taylor's last point, I could talk about the hacker side of things until the cows come home. That is what this is for.
Well, I want to thank both Martin and Taylor again for the time and the discussion. And I think this is, hopefully for the rest of the VetPartners members, whether you're listening to the recording or we're here in person, just another way of looking at where we're going with technology and how much data is being exchanged and how we can provide support for our veterinary practices as they kind of look at that value exchange and who they can go to and what they can expect when it comes to the future around data. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye, everyone.
Appreciate the time.
Be well.